Kensington Palace, where once they all lived as a family, to gaze at the sea of flowers left for Princess Diana and to say thank you, over and over again to all the expressions of sorrow at their loss. Out of this, the future king may have made his pact with the people. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh signed the Book of Condolence at St. James' Palace and paid their respects at the coffin. And then they joined the throngs in the Mall, who'd been crying out for a demonstration of the royal family's grief at the death of Diana, whom she described as an exceptional and gifted human being. And she went a long way to healing this week's rift with the public by speaking from the heart.
We have all been trying in our different ways to cope. It is not easy to express.
Diana and her explanation that she was speaking from the heart, both as a sovereign and as a grandmother, has gone some way to end the criticism. People will remember that she wasn't there when they wanted her for themselves. This may all mark a dramatic change in the way that the monarchy conducts itself. The cold and the rain are as nothing for those who are determined on their vigil for Princess Diana. Around Westminster Abbey, people have settled in so they can be assured of a vantage point to say their last farewell to the woman who touched so many hearts. Judith Dawson, Sky News, Westminster.
What was arguably the most important royal broadcast since Edward VIII's abdication announcement was scrutinised minutely by the crowds outside the royal palaces, as in millions of homes across the country. Since the death of Diana, the people of Britain had at best been ambivalent about the response of the royal family to the expression of national mourning. Views differed as to whether the Queen had judged the broadcast correctly.
It is a chance to show to the whole world.
This speech, I don't think it means anything. I think it's futile.
We waited all that time for a speech and I felt it should have been longer. I felt it was too short.
I thought it was genuine. I thought she meant what she said. She said it from the heart, and she said what the people wanted her to say.
Knowing that she was her daughter-in-law for 15 years, you would have thought she would have shown some, or just something. It's just too late, too little, too late.
I mean, the Queen needs to do a lot more to actually show people that she truly and herself and the family do feel the way the nation feels.
I feel like she was entitled to her privately. When you lose somebody that, like she had, her grandchildren's mother, it must be dreadful for her. She really, really had to have her own privacy.
As the Queen was broadcasting, a special Requiem Mass was being celebrated at Westminster Cathedral. There was a highly personalised tribute to Diana by the Roman Catholic Archbishop Basil Hume, in which he spoke almost directly to her, unashamedly recalling how the princess was, like most people, a vulnerable human being.
Farewell, then, Diana. The agonies of the heart and anguish of the mind, often your companions in life, were your teachers too. From them you learned understanding, compassion, and kindness. These are your finest legacy for us. Thank you for all the good you did. Thank you for the joy you gave to so many. Thank you for being like the rest of us, flawed but lovable, and above all, loved by God.
The service was attended by Diana's mother, Frances Shand Kidd, for whom the next 24 hours are going to be a most harrowing time, as they will be for all family members and the country at large. Graham Leach, Sky News.
It's been revealed that lawyers acting for the family of Princess Diana have filed a civil suit in Paris in connection with her death. It came as Dodi Al Fayed's father, Mohammed, released video pictures showing the last moments of Princess Diana and his son. The Harrods boss said he wanted to prove that their chauffeur from the Ritz Hotel wasn't drunk when he drove the couple that night. Henri Paul's funeral has been postponed because his family want new blood tests.
These are the very last images of the princess and her Egyptian companion, filmed on the security cameras of the Paris Ritz Hotel as Diana and Dodi El Fayed arrived for dinner. A happy, carefree couple, despite the fact they were accompanied by a bodyguard and were being followed by photographers. Over 2 hours later, with by this time something of a horde of photographers and onlookers waiting by the front entrance on the Place Vendôme, the couple departed by the hotel's rear entrance. They leave with the driver, Henri Paul, the man wearing the spectacles in this shot. As the pictures were released, it was announced his funeral was being postponed. Mr. Paul, himself seen walking into the Ritz that night here, was to have been buried just before the princess tomorrow. But his family have sent his body back to Paris for a second blood test, believing a first post-crash examination, which showed he was way over the legal alcohol limit, was not accurate. Simultaneously, the French authorities have appointed a second investigative judge to unravel the halo of mystery, which, as one source put it, still surrounds the tragedy. The appointment of a second investigating judge is highly unusual. Only happens in very complex or sensitive cases like this one. It's also yet another sign of the political pressure that's being exerted on the judiciary here to resolve the question of who's to blame as quickly as possible. That the inquiry is deeply troubled is becoming ever more apparent. One of the photographers charged with manslaughter this afternoon explaining he'd only arrived at the scene after the emergency services and claiming he'd committed anything but a crime.
When I saw her, the emergency services were helping her, and it's a scene I will remember all my life because she was so very beautiful. If I had been allowed to take a photograph, I wouldn't have been able to, and I think all my colleagues there were also stunned.
And his lawyer revealed completely new information which could help explain the crash.
This is a puzzle, and the judge and the police have not achieved the puzzle. One of the elements was certainly based on the fact that before the Mercedes was driving a very little car, about 50 kilometers per hour, and the Mercedes has to, to make a very tough, very immediate move to avoid the crash with this little. This is in the puzzle, in the very complex reasons which brings to the crash. This is one of the elements.
3 other photographers who'd fled the accident scene and only turned themselves in yesterday are still being questioned. But whether the investigative judges will be so quick to accuse them of manslaughter after the revelations of the past few days is increasingly doubtful. Anna van Linden, Sky News, Paris.
Mother Teresa, the nun regarded as a living saint for her work with the poor, has died at the age of 87. Just a few days ago, she'd paid a moving tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, who'd been one of her greatest admirers. The Queen has sent a message of condolence to the missionaries of charity in Calcutta, calling Mother Teresa an inspiration worldwide.
From different sides of the world and from very different societies, they had shared so much in common. And Diana, Princess of Wales, was her most high-profile and devoted admirer. Only days earlier, Mother Teresa had paid a moving tribute to the princess. For decades, she had been known for her work among the very poorest of people, the victims of neglect, poverty and disease, the people nobody wanted. Not only in Calcutta, where she founded her Order of Missionaries of Charity, but worldwide.
With the passing of Mother Teresa, the world has lost one of the giants of our time. She served the poor, the suffering, and the dying. And in so doing, she served as an inspiration and a challenge to all the rest of us.
In 1979, her compassionate work led to the Nobel Peace Prize, an acknowledgement of a determined and single-minded approach to her life's work.
The joy of loving one another and the joy acknowledging that the poorest of the poor are our brothers and sisters.
And when Queen Elizabeth visited India, Mother Teresa was presented with the Order of Merit, which she accepted again on behalf of her charity. She made use of her high profile to spread her message and work. She joined forces with Bob Geldof to promote the worldwide campaign for famine-stricken Ethiopia. she personally helped evacuate handicapped children from war-torn Beirut. When the Pope visited Calcutta, she was there to greet him with garlands and to be garlanded in turn by the Pope. But age and the grinding years began to take their toll. In 1992, she had to spend time in an Italian clinic following 2 heart attacks and surgery. Even this didn't slow her down. She attended the memorial for Mahatma Gandhi.
Lord, make me a channel of thy peace.
She visited Ireland and gave President Mary Robinson a statuette of the Virgin Mary. In Rome, to mark the Catholic Church's International Year of the Family, she spoke to a packed St. Peter's Square. But her health was causing concern, and at 86 she was weakening. She had to be treated for malaria, pneumonia and heart failure, and was taken home with great care. By September this year, on the 50th anniversary of the founding of her charity, she was very weak. But again, she was surrounded by her Sisters of Charity, who had given up all worldly possessions to help the world's poorest, as Mother Teresa had done herself so many decades ago.
You're watching Sky News. We will have more news, sport and weather after this.
It was a nasty road smash in a short road tunnel next to the River Seine, the scene of many accidents before it. The passing doctor who tried to save one of the dying victims did not immediately recognize her, but the photographers who were on the scene in seconds puzzled and angered the shocked witnesses. The photographers knew something they did not know. The policeman there recognized the car as one of the Ritz Hotel's limousines. There were urgent radio calls, a request for its registration number. The awful truth was established. 2 of the broken people lying in the wreckage were Dodi Fayed and Diana, Princess of Wales. As surgeons at the Petit-Salpêtrière hospital fought to save Diana's life through the hours before dawn, the news raced through the city and on to London and around the world. Princess Diana had been critically injured in a car smash. At 5 in the morning, the hospital announced that the surgeons had lost their fight to save Diana's life. Her massive internal injuries had been more than they could cope with.
À son arrivée à l'hôpital de la Pitié-Salpêtrière, elle présentait un choc hémorragique gravissime, d'origine thoracique, puis rapidement un arrêt cardiaque.
Millions of Britons were still asleep and yet to hear the dreadful news when the first spontaneous gestures of mourning were made at the gates of Buckingham Palace. These first flowers were to be followed by millions more. News of the violent death of the beautiful princess, whose unhappiness and then her personal compassion for others had endeared her to millions, might have travelled with great speed through the world's news networks, but most who heard it needed to be convinced it was true. In Manila, the British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, was the first to raise the question of the photographers who'd been following the car when it crashed.
I am greatly shocked by this news. Our first thoughts must be with her children and with her family at this time of immense loss to them. I was fortunate to have the opportunity of working with the Princess on her international charity work. I believe what has happened is a tragic loss at a young age of someone who'd shown great courage and commitment in drawing attention to serious issues. For the next few days, her family and the nation must have time to come to terms with their immense sadness and loss. In the longer term, serious questions will need to be asked as to whether the aggressive intrusion into her privacy has contributed to this tragedy. Thank you.
The world has lost a princess who is quite simply irreplaceable, and Mr. Al Fayed has lost his beloved eldest son. The thoughts of Mr. and Mrs. Al Fayed are with the princess's family. Mr. Al Fayed is quite sure that this terrible tragedy would never have happened but for these photographers, if that's the word we're going to use for them, and their attentions.
Prince Charles, Diana's former husband, flew to Paris to accompany Diana's coffin on its return to England. An unbearably poignant mission for a man who fell out of love with his wife, who divorced her to struggle with his own unhappiness in the relentless floodlight of public interest which was not always sympathetic. He'd been on holiday in Scotland with his 2 sons. Diana was said to have dreaded the time of year when she must be parted from them. This time, they were to be parted for good. Prince Charles was to bring her home in her coffin, sadly paying his respects to President Chirac, in whose country and capital the princess had met her death. Diana was flown home to England in an aircraft of the Queen's flight. Its distinctive outline was to become ever more familiar as it flew back and forth, taking Prince Charles back to Scotland, then the Queen and her family back from Balmoral. It flew the princess's body into Northolt, a Royal Air Force station to the west of London, frequently used for the comings and goings of diplomats and heads of state. The arrival was a ceremony, and yet it was not. This solemn procedure was a necessity devised in a matter of the few hours which had passed since dawn, since the death of Princess Diana had been announced in Paris. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, had flown down from his constituency in the northeast of England to be there. Slowly, the coffin, draped in the royal standard, was borne past the line of people who'd come to meet it and the people who'd accompanied it on the flight from Paris, the princess's 2 sisters and Prince Charles. This sad homecoming was not to be witnessed by members of the public who were not admitted to the station, but their turn would come. In London, the news brought the crowds to Buckingham Palace. There was nothing and nobody to see there, but the British have always been drawn to the palace at times of crisis and times of happiness. They gathered in Kensington Gardens, outside Kensington Palace, Princess Diana's last home. A spontaneous coming together of thousands, who would be followed by thousands more, then millions.
Quite emotionally distraught at the moment. But I think the whole nation is going to grieve for a long, long time.
Something just pulled me. I can't say anything, but something just pulled me. I couldn't sit at home, look at the TV, and it was just something like inside me. And basically we miss her.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her 2 sons, the 2 boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain throughout the world with joy and with comfort. How many times shall we remember her, in how many different ways? With the sick, the dying, with children, with the needy. When with just a look or a gesture that spoke so much more than words, she would reveal to all of us the depth of her compassion and her humanity.
Diana's temporary resting place was St James's Palace, just round the corner from Buckingham Palace. Now her presence was known, this was to be the focal point of public grief in the coming days. Dodi Fayed, who died instantly beside Diana in the crash, slipped out of public consciousness. His private funeral service was at the mosque in Regent's Park, and in accordance with Muslim custom, he was buried within 24 hours of his death. There was to be no tailing off, no slackening in the respectful vigil that had centred itself on St James's Palace. 5 books of condolence were opened there, and a long and orderly queue was formed. At first, it took an hour to reach the palace. Soon the waiting time was increased to 11 hours, and the number of books increased from 5 to 15, then to 43. The queue stretched out into the mall in sight of Buckingham Palace. People waited patiently through the nights and days to leave a personal record of their sorrow.
Princess Diana, she truly is the Queen of Hearts, you know, and I wrote that in my letter to her.
I put to a courageous and lovely lady, a unique lady, who by her example and her courage showed people how they should live their lives and how we should help one another.
Now that she's gone, we begin to start realizing really how much people cared about her. And that's more or less what I put down there. I mean, what I wrote was really like a letter to her.
I love who she was. She was a beautiful person, and you know, it's a tragedy. So I just want to, while I'm here, just pay some tribute in some way from me and my family and my people I represent back at home.
You just feel a bond. You don't have to know her. She's just there. She just always was, and I just don't think that people are ever really going to get over the fact that she's gone.
Diana, she was a good Samaritan.
There must be loads and loads of other mothers exactly the same, feeling exactly the same as what I do today. You know, we're all so terribly sad.
In Paris, the French authorities, deeply embarrassed by the princess's death, moved to prosecute 6 photographers and a motorcyclist arrested at the scene of the crash with the manslaughter of the 3 victims. 2 more photographers were later to join them. The funeral was to be in Westminster Abbey. The planned route for the funeral cortege was to be from St James's Palace, down the Mall and along Whitehall to Parliament Square. But the ever-growing crowds in London and the mountains of flowers they brought indicated that such a short distance might lead to dangerous overcrowding along the route. The plan was revised. The cortege would start out from Kensington Palace out to the west of central London, making it possible for hundreds of thousands more to line the route. But in the midst of the sorrow, discord arose around the royal family still in Balmoral. People grew critical of the Queen because she'd remained there along with Prince Charles and his 2 sons. No flag flew at Buckingham Palace, and explanations that the Royal Standard flies there only when she is in residence and that anyway it never flies at half-mast did little to stem the disapproval.
Everybody's grieving. I think she should show some form of support for the people.
I think it's disgusting. The Queen actually hasn't made a speech. The royal family basically are going downhill in my views, and I think the general public will say the same.
The Queen has asked me to say that the royal family have been hurt by suggestions that they are indifferent to the country's sorrow at the tragic death of the Princess of Wales. The Princess was a much-loved national figure, but she was also a mother. His sons miss her deeply. Prince William and Prince Harry themselves want to be with their father and their grandparents at this time in the quiet haven of Balmoral. As their grandmother, the Queen is helping the princes to come to terms with their loss as they prepare themselves for the public ordeal of mourning their mother with the nation on Saturday.
The criticism of the royal family, which was partly founded on misunderstanding of the protocol surrounding the flying of the Royal Standard, reached northwards to Balmoral, where Her Majesty decided to act quickly to put things right. The Queen appeared at the gates of Balmoral, along with the Duke of Edinburgh, the Prince of Wales, and his sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, to look at the wreaths, bunches of flowers and messages of affection left by local people, a reflection of the tons of blooms which now lay outside 3 palaces in the capital. Her Majesty, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles and the Queen Mother boarded their waiting aircraft at Aberdeen to return to London. Prince William and Prince Harry left on a second aircraft. Her Majesty was to broadcast to the nation that evening, only the second occasion on which he'd done so at any other time than at Christmas. On their arrival, the Union flag appeared flying at half-mast over Buckingham Palace. Rarely has the monarch appeared on foot immediately outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. This was to be the mending of her brief estrangement from the people. Once more, she and the Duke of Edinburgh took their time to read some of the messages of sympathy left with the flowers. There were sad, acknowledging smiles at the sympathy spoken to them from the crowd. It was all right. The Queen and her grieving family were at one with the people once more. Outside Kensington Palace, their London home, the young princes did the same, greeting their sympathisers with sad, acknowledging smiles. Very early in their lives, they were exposed to the custom of the royal walkabout, but on an occasion of enormous personal grief. Their maturity and poise impressed all who saw them.
Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen throughout Britain and around the world